to the best damn podcast in the known universe. Your opinion doesn't matter. And this is a very special edition because we are following up on our Bruce Pritchard interview from last week with another very special guest. A guest just as special. This is a guy who I've been a fan of for a very long period of time, and he was extremely influential during the Monday Night Wars and was the only man who can stake a claim to beating Vince McMahon head-to-head in the ratings. He did it for 84 straight weeks. I'm talking about the one and only Eric Bischoff. He joins Brad Gilmore and myself on the show for over 30 minutes today as he discusses the current state of sports entertainment and professional wrestling. We talk a little politics back and forth, which is definitely apropos right now. In addition to that, he covers his thoughts on WrestleMania, Shane McMahon's return, Sting's Hall of Fame induction, and so much more. So without further ado, Brad Gilmore and myself speaking to Eric Bischoff.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Your Opinion Doesn't Matter. As we promised, a major guest, Matt Topolski, on the line right now. His accolades speak for himself. We have Mr. Eric Bischoff on the line. Eric, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Happy to be here, gentlemen. Happy to be here.
Well, Mr. Bischoff, a lot of things are going on in the world, and I know you're a knowledgeable man of many a field, and we wanted to know if it'd be okay if we talked a little politics with you.
Absolutely okay. It's my passion as of late.
Topolski, take it away.
Yeah, well, Eric, it's a great pleasure to talk to you. Big fan. Obviously grew up with Nitro and the Monday Night Wars, so great to talk to you. I'm also a political nerd myself, so let me just get your take, if I can, on what is going on in the 2016 presidential election. You know, we had this incredible debate last night, which was, in my opinion, kind of a bloodbath. Well, not kind of. It was a bloodbath. What are your thoughts and opinions on what we've seen from this crazy political cycle so far?
You know, I think what we're seeing is the manifestation of a lot of resentment, anger, fear, distrust, and frustration in the American public in general, across the board, Democrats and Republicans. And I think a lot of it is just because of what's transpired for the last 8 years. I mean, we have been lied to by Obama, by Hillary, by Harry Reid, by Nancy Pelosi, by anybody and everybody in the liberal Democratic Party for the last 8 years in such shocking ways. I mean, this is not, you know, up until 2008, let's face it, politics has always been politics. There's always been manipulation. There's always been, you know, the shifting of sands in terms of, you know, a candidate saying one thing out on the campaign trail and then doing another once he or she gets into office. That's part of politics, not only here in the United States, it's all over the world, but in democracies. But we've seen such a heightened level of dishonesty from this administration, and it's boiled over now into the Republican Party. The Republicans in 2012, you know, campaigned hard. You know, let us take over Senate. We've got the Congress. Let us take over Senate. Let us be in control. Okay, so now the Republicans got the Congress. They got the Senate in 2012, and they did nothing because they were fearful. They were fearful that if they held their ground on budgetary issues, if they threatened to shut down the government and actually shut down the government and held Obama's feet to the fire, the Republicans in control at that time were so fearful that their constituency, the Republican base, would bail on them, would hold them accountable, and Democrats would come out en masse and blame the Republicans for you know, ruining things for everybody else. And I think Republicans were so afraid of that they did nothing. So now you've got a combination of the current administration who are just pathological freaking liars, and you have a Republican Party who promised their constituency that things were going to change if they were voted into office. Well, they got voted into office, and nothing changed. So now I think the combination of being lied to and disappointed, lied to by the Democrats, disappointed in their own party, the Republicans, now you've got what we saw last night, which was, as you put it, a bloodbath, and that's exactly what I tweeted last night about 10 minutes into it when, Donald Trump, felt compelled to justify the size of his genitalia on the presidential debate platform. I realized then that, we're at a crucial point, and it's frustration, fear, disappointment, all of that together has got us to the point now where I have no idea what's going to happen. I mean, think about it. I promise I'll shut up here in a second. But think about it. We have a choice between a career criminal in Hillary Clinton and a self-described socialist in Bernie Sanders on the one hand, and then you've got Donald Trump, who, there's a lot of things I like about Donald Trump. There's a lot of things, especially after last night, I don't like about Donald Trump. Same could be said for Rubio. Same could be said for Cruz. I'm not 100% comfortable in the top three. I'm liking Kasich a lot more just because he had the sense and the civility and the presence of thought not to get sucked into what looked like an eighth-grade food fight to me. I just have a hard time having a lot of confidence in people that would stoop that low, especially in the presidential debate. You've got to have some decorum. You have to prove that you could be a leader, and I don't think Trump, certainly not Trump, nor Rubio, accomplished either of that last night.
Yeah, I got the sense myself from watching that last night. First of all, I mean, I've worked in politics off and on myself for the last 10 years. I have never, ever seen anything like that on a presidential debate stage. And it seems like just by attrition alone, it looks like Kasich now, that may have been a pivotal moment last night for Kasich and for this election in general. Well, I think John Kasich had that Jack Kennedy type moment when he started talking about working with Ronald Reagan and comparing him to the candidates. But Eric, I got to ask you, do you think that Kasich has a shot at getting the nomination?
I'm not an expert in the political math and the electoral math and the rules within the varying states in terms of how delegates are assigned, I guess, or won, are very complicated. And I don't want to try to convince anybody I thoroughly understand it. I don't. But what I do understand, and I do watch a lot and read a lot about the process, and it appears to me that Kasich probably does have a shot through what they call a brokered convention or the convention, because I don't think Trump is going to walk into July with a sufficient number of delegates to get the nomination. I do believe there's going to be a brokered convention, and I do believe the establishment is going to get behind Kasich, and I do believe if there is a shot for Kasich, that's probably it.
But a lot of people feel, obviously, Donald Trump, one of the most polarizing figures, maybe in political history. But you mentioned there was a lot of things that you liked about Donald Trump. What are some of those things?
I love his directness. I love the fact that he is unfiltered to a degree. I don't like, for example, the level of discourse that he got into last night. But look, I think one of the things that is so appealing to Trump is he doesn't sound like everybody else. And I'm talking about Democrats, other Republicans. And I'll give you an example. I'm not picking on Ted Cruz because there's things I like about Ted as well. But when you listen to Ted Cruz speak, now it depends what gear he's in. If he's in his I have a dream gear, he comes off, something like he's trying to be Martin Luther King. Everything is this like floral kind of high altitude presentation in the way he tries to communicate. And I can't stand that because I don't feel like it's sincere. Now, when Cruz gets into the thick of it, when Cruz is in debate mode and he's debating facts and points, he's laser focused, and I'm very impressed by him. But when he's in that, orator gear, I'm not, because I don't believe he's sincere. And that's the difference with Trump. Trump, it's kind of like, as I say on my Twitter account, E. Bischoff, it's, no filter. It is what it is. And I respect that in people. I respect it when they're not trying to double speak. I respect it when politicians answer a question without leaving themselves 3 back doors to get out in case things don't go the way they wanted them to in the question or the debate. So I love that directness. I don't like the personal attacks and the childish aspect of some of the ways and some of the things that Trump has done. Starting off with, his attacks on Megyn Kelly, which I think were just preposterous. not only is she, a warrior, she is an incredible and a gifted talk show host. She's very, very fair. For him to come out hacking and slashing at her the way he did because she asked him a tough question that he didn't like, I lost a lot of respect for him in that moment. The things I like about him, aside from the fact that he's kind of a no-filter guy, is he understands business. Let's for Rubio and Cruz or anybody else, to criticize Trump for his lack of knowledge of economic policy and foreign policy, some of it is warranted. But Cruz has never built a business, and Cruz has never run a country. He's a freshman senator. He's new on the job. He's never really accomplished anything. He was a good attorney, a great attorney. He argued before the Supreme Court. He knows a lot about the law. He knows a lot about the law, obviously. But that doesn't make him. Doesn't make him understand business. It doesn't make him understand economics. Certainly doesn't make him understand foreign affairs any better than anybody else. Now, Barack Obama certainly didn't have any understanding of business or of foreign affairs or of the economy. Yeah, he knew constitutional law. He knew it well enough to try to get around it, which is what most lawyers do. Know enough about the law to find a way to work around it. But I don't think any of those candidates on the platform, any one of them, knew enough about everything to rise head and shoulders above anybody. They're all good in their own respects. They all have talents and assets and things that led them to being able to get to that point that they are now. But, none of them are perfect, and that's what makes it so hard. But of the remaining candidates right now, after what I saw last night, Kasich first, anybody is better than Clinton, so it doesn't matter. but Kasich would have to be my choice at this point.
I think some of the appeal for John Kasich is that's a guy who I could sit, maybe have a cold one with, and we could talk and have a civil conversation. And we are in Texas. Texas is a big beer drinking state, to say the very least. And I know you've actually thrown your name in the hat when it comes to brewing beer with Buffalo Bill Cody beer. We want to tell the people a little bit about what you're doing with that.
It's a small project that it started out as a vanity project. My wife and I, my family, have had a home up in Cody, Wyoming, just outside of Yellowstone Park since the late 90s, early 98. 97, 98, somewhere there. And we just love the area. We love the history. I've been going up there since I was 22 years old. Back in 77 was the first time I went to Cody, Wyoming, and fell in love with it. And I said to myself, 5 minutes after I stepped foot into the city limits, I told myself, someday I am going to live here. It took me 20 years to do it, but we got it done. But, being a part of the community as I am and familiar with the history and the mystique, I guess, of Buffalo Bill Cody in the Wild West. We had like 2 million tourists a year, I think, come through Cody, Wyoming on their way to Yellowstone. A small little town of 10,000 people all of a sudden, is bursting at the seams with tourists. And I thought, wow, somebody ought to have a Buffalo Bill Cody beer. Send every one of these people home with a hat, a jacket, a hat, a T-shirt, and a 6-pack of beer. Let them take that back to New Jersey with them instead of a plastic cowboy Indian. And we did it as a vanity thing, and it grew and grew and grew, and then it took on a life of its own. And now we're distributed in obviously all of Wyoming, Montana, Arizona, Nevada, and we'll possibly be expanding into Colorado here very shortly.
Oh, that's exciting stuff. I'm a big fan of craft brew myself, so I'm looking for. Do you have any intention of bringing it to Texas anytime soon, Eric?
No, it's not likely because I don't have my own brewery. I contract brew, as I say, with one of the best microbrewers in the country, the Fort Collins Brewing Company in Fort Collins, Colorado. So, and I've only got the one SKU, one variety of beer. So I'm not built. I never intended to kind of roll this thing out nationally, and I certainly don't have the infrastructure or the desire to try to have it to roll it out any bigger than it really is. It's still kind of a vanity project. It's just a really, really big and expensive one at this point.
Well, listen, we here at Reality of Wrestling, because that's what Brad and I do, we are the hosts of Reality of Wrestling for Booker T, who I know that you're familiar with. And,
We've been growing the show over the last few years. Reality of Wrestling recently celebrated its 10-year anniversary. And the interesting thing about this is, Eric, is that we now shoot our show on a soundstage filmed at the Mall of the Mainland here in Houston, and the original Nitro took place at the Mall of America. So, your resume doesn't need to be repeated, but based on your experience and everything that you've done in the business, now here in 2016, so many different things have changed in the wrestling business. What advice would you give to an organization like ours or other organizations that are trying to grow nationally and globally in professional wrestling in 2016?
Well, that's a tough one, because when you say, what advice would I give someone who's trying to grow, a local independent wrestling organization nationally? That's a big challenge. It's a big challenge because, today's television environment is extremely complex. As your listeners may know, or you may or may not know, I have a television production company, have had since 2003 with my partner Jason Hervey, and we produced television, non-scripted television, and some scripted within one sitcom. But we've been producing television for all of the major networks, cable, and a few of the terrestrial networks, for the last 13 years. And over the last 18 months, we've seen the business change so dramatically, and it's become so much more difficult. And it's primarily due to the emergence of digital platforms and the effect that has had on the advertising community, which ultimately affects people like you and me. Because if the advertisers are not spending money in television, then the television networks have to cut their budgets, which means producers like us, independent producers, end up feeling the brunt of that. And that's kind of what we're going through. Networks are really, really cautious now about what they put on their schedule, because there are so many networks now, cable networks in particular, because there are so many choices, including the digital platforms, where so many more people are getting so much more of their entertainment, that networks are now branding themselves very, very specifically. It used to be networks, they may want to be like Spike used to be, we're the guys network. Well, that didn't work out completely for them. So they needed to skew more women. And instead of being the guys network, now we want to be, they describe themselves as a different kind of a network. There are other networks that, I swear to God, but one minute I'm looking at something from my agents that says Network X wants to be the, blue hair old lady network. And they want all of their programming to reflect the sensibility of a 55-year and up, female. Okay, we'll get to work on that. 2 weeks later, we don't want to be the blue-haired, senior citizen network. We want to be the millennial network. It's like, the networks are just undergoing these brand transformations on such a regular, consistent basis now. It's really difficult to tell what they want to do or how they want to profile themselves. So for producers like us, it just makes our jobs that much harder. To your question, for anybody, you guys included, for anybody who is starting up a wrestling organization that wants to grow nationally, it's almost difficult, if not completely impossible, to do it in the traditional sense, meaning linear television. I think now, if I were to start a wrestling company today, I would be looking at a 100% digital strategy, and I wouldn't even consider traditional television because A, it's too expensive, B, nobody's buying it. There's not a network out there that wants to buy an upstart wrestling show on a national platform. And B, in order to compete in traditional linear television, people automatically going to compare you to the WWE. And that's a comparison that nobody can live up to. But if somebody were smart enough, and I've been giving this a lot of thought lately, but if somebody were smart enough to figure out the right digital strategy and then shape that content so that it appeals to those who are most likely inclined to seek out their sports entertainment on a digital platform, then I think you might be able to find a home run. But it's a long, slow process. It's not like the old days.
You know, to that point, there are reports circling around that TNA, which obviously you are familiar with and worked for many years, is up for sale once again. You know, based on what you've said and based on your experience there and working with Dixie Carter and working within TNA, what would you attribute some of their challenges to? I mean, they're on Pop TV now. They've just posted their lowest rating yet, roughly 210,000 viewers on, I think, their latest episode. Is it over for TNA in your opinion, and what would you attribute some of their challenges to?
Yeah, I don't comment on TNA because I'm in litigation with them right now, so I'll let that one slide for a little later down the road.
Okay, understood. Understood completely. All right, well let's turn the page a little bit and talk about something that's a little bit more fun then. You were a part, obviously, of the Beatles of pro wrestling, as far as I'm concerned, the NWO. Just my favorite memories as a child growing up, watching the Monday Night Wars and watching the New World Order and everything that took place. If there's no NWO, in my opinion, there's no DX. There was no Nexus and the other things that came about. Recently, the Bullet Club has been a very popular faction in Japan. It's growing in popularity in the U.S. because of talents that have migrated from Japan to NXT and WWE now. In terms of the NWO, can you kind of take us through that creative process a little bit and how it came about and that moment, that night when Hulk Hogan made the turn? What did it feel like? What was it like to be a part of the New World Order and how that the genesis of that entire group?
Well, I'll start at the beginning in terms of, you know, how did it all start and what was the genesis of the idea. And, you know, I've read so many times and heard so often how I went over to Japan, I saw something over there similar to the NWO, and I just brought that same idea back here. And that's not true. You know, I've tried to articulate this, you know, in the past, but for some reason, apparently I don't do a very good job. But, you know, I was spending a lot of time in Japan. I was going over there a couple times a year to a lot of the big events. And this is going back now to the I would say 93, 94, before Nitro. Even 95 before Nitro started, I was doing a lot of business over there and getting very close to the product and close to the management at New Japan Pro Wrestling. Now, this was a different management, different ownership of New Japan. This was back when they were, you know, when you say they're doing really good business in Japan, this is when New Japan was putting 80 and 90,000 people in the egg dome. That was big business to me. And I was watching that. And by the way, at that same time, when New Japan was just, you know, printing money and so popular all across Japan. At that same time, WCW was struggling. You know, this was before Nitro. This was before all of the great stuff happened. So I would go over there and I would study what the Japanese did. Not so much what they did exactly in the ring, but the psychology of what they did. And it was the psychology of what I learned in Japan that was the catalyst for the NWO, not an angle that I saw or a representation of the NWO in Japan. That's not it at all. What I learned and studied was the psychology and how in New Japan they went to such extremes to make their product believable in the ring and outside of the ring. And they were so great at it that, and I was shocked that, you know, what I saw there sometimes. I go over there for some of the big shows, like a New Year's Eve show, for example. It was a big, big show. And I'd get up the next morning, and on the front page of, you know, Tokyo's biggest newspapers is the headlines from the event that I went to the night before on the sports page. Where in the United States at that time, you know, what you get coverage, you know, in mainstream media is if some really, really horrible thing happened. and then it was certainly not positive. And whereas in Japan, you know, the business, the industry was on the same level as baseball, you know, as soccer or, you know, anything else that is a traditional sport in Japan. So I looked at that and I thought, okay, why? Why is it that way? Part of it is cultural, but part of it is the presentation. Part of it is the mystique. Part of it is just the psychology. And I looked for ways to apply that psychology in the United States and try to make our product more believable. Now, in fairness, one of the formulas that was successful in Japan at the time was the kind of intercompany rivalries and challenges and takeovers and all that. That I did see. That was part of the psychology to me, but there was never a representation of the NWO over there. But I did like the idea of companies trying to, take over other companies. It reminded me of when I was a martial artist, and Bruce Richard will probably relate to this as well. But back when I came up in martial arts, it was kind of that old school, leftover, early Chuck Norris, kind of Bill Wallace mentality where if I opened up a karate school in your neighborhood and you owned a karate school in that neighborhood, you'd come over and either you'd kick my ass or I'd kick yours to find out who got to keep the doors open. And that kind of territorialism, in business, it always kind of interested me and intrigued me. And I thought, wow, if we could figure out a way to bring that to the United States, that would be awesome. So it was really the NWO, to be really honest about it, was more about timing and opportunity and a little bit of thought process on my part than it was anything else. And I would say they're equal parts. But while I was shaping this idea in my head of, wow, wouldn't it be great if I could find a way to import that Japanese psychology and that sense of intercompany rivalry? Wouldn't it be cool if I could bring that over to the bring that over to the United States in a way that felt so much different than what wrestling fans had been watching up to that point? And coincidentally, right at that same time, as I was formulating that thought, or beginning to, and it wasn't a complete, thought. I hadn't had it all figured out. But as I was kind of shaping this idea in my head, Scott Hall became available. Now, that is incredibly significant because Scott Hall started off in the AWA, but he was a WCW guy for a long time and never really kind of made it, and that was not his fault. That was just the way WCW was at the time. And he got frustrated. Thought he wasn't getting used properly. I hate that word, used properly, because people use the word that don't know what use means in the wrestling business, but that he wasn't used properly. And he left frustrated, pissed off at WCW and went to WWE and went on to become a big star. Kevin Nash, same thing. He was Oz, for crying out loud, in WCW. And he hated it. And then he went over to WWE and became a big star. So now I got two guys who, former WCW guys, went off to WWE, became big stars, and now we're sick of WWE and wanted to come back. That was the light bulb that went off in my head, because now these two guys have the opportunity to come from the WWE with a chip on their shoulder and run roughshod in WCW because they weren't treated properly. And the fact that they went on to become WWE stars was all of the proof that they needed. And it was all the proof the wrestling fans needed. So there was a believability. When Scott Hall came back and when Kevin Nash came in, they came in pissed off, chip on their shoulder, and they came back to prove to WCW that they should have been big stars before they left. That was the premise of the story, and that's why it worked so well, because it was believable. You could sit back and go, listen to their promos and go, "Oh yeah, I don't blame them for being mad." And it was so believable that, and that's what's missing in the industry today, in my opinion. Is, look, it is what it is. We all know it's sports entertainment. Just like we all know Game of Thrones is Game of Thrones. It's not real. It's not really happening. It didn't really happen. It's not even history. It's just a fantasy. But it's phenomenally well done, so much so that you just allow yourself to forget the fact that it's all scripted and these are actors. You get sucked into the story. You get sucked into the characters. And the same thing can be done in wrestling. It isn't, for the most part, that I see, but it can be. Now, the difference being is right now is the Shane McMahon, Undertaker, Vince McMahon scenario, kind of like that, because there's a sense of believability attached to it in history. So that's the one exception that's going on now in my mind. But beyond that, it's the same old just blah formula when it comes to storytelling and character development. But I love the reality of it. When a viewer can sit back and go, yeah, I know, wrestling's wrestling, but these two guys really are hot at each other. And usually you achieve that when there's a sense of believability or truth to their creative issue. That's when that happens. Just like we're seeing it now with Shane McMahon and Vince McMahon. They're playing off their real-life drama. The real-life drama is Shane McMahon picked up and walked away from a billion-dollar company as the son of the chairman. He walked away from it because he just didn't enjoy it anymore. I'm not speaking for him because I haven't ever had this conversation with him, but from what I've read and what I understand through mutual acquaintances. Now that aspect of real life is now the central portion of the story going into WrestleMania, and I think that's fantastic. And I think that's the art now in 2016 is finding new ways to find truth, to find reality, and then shape it and grow it, and fertilize it, and turn it into something that's workable for television and entertaining at the same time. That's the art. That's what I like. And believe me, I understand. Wrestling is a buffet. Some people like really, I watched New Day, the other night I was watching Raw. And it was the first time I'd see him, to be honest. And I don't watch Raw on a consistent basis because I don't watch a lot of anything on a consistent basis other than the news, occasional documentaries. But I dropped in. My wife was off. She was taking a class, and it was just me and my dog. I had the TV to myself. So I thought, I'm going to sit down and watch an entire show. And I did. And it was the first time I saw New Day. Now, these guys are very, very talented. Don't take anything I'm about to say as derisive or taking a shot at these guys in any way, because this is not it. But I'm looking at their character. I'm looking at the way they come into the ring. I'm looking at the presentation, and it's the same thing I saw in 1980. It's carnival-like. It's cartoonish. It's very animated. It's high energy. And you know what? A lot of fans probably like that. Me personally, I can't relate to it, but it doesn't mean it doesn't have a place on the show. You got to give people a variety, especially in a 3-hour show, for crying out loud. You got to give them a lot of variety in 3 hours.
It's a long show,
but that's an example of the type of presentation that, for me, regardless of how talented the talent is, that presentation just turns me off. But that's me. I'm 60 years old. I like a different style. I think now, for me, I would be looking for reality, believability, relatability. I would embrace the grit a little bit more. When I watch WWE, it's such a phenomenal product. It's almost too phenomenal. It's a live show that doesn't look live. It looks like it was shot. It was some of the best editors and post-production, facilities in the world worked on it, for weeks at a time, and it looks fantastic. But sometimes when something looks that good, it doesn't feel live anymore. I'd let it get a little grittier, to be honest with you. I don't mean adult. I don't mean, over the top, going back to the Attitude Era. I'm just talking about presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we know we have to get you out of here, but before we do, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about Sting's Hall of Fame induction. I mean, very few people were closer to Sting over the course of his career, especially when he was really on top and the hottest in his career than you were with Sting. How do you feel about his induction, and anything you'd like to say about the Stinger?
I just have nothing but the utmost respect for Sting as a man, as a human being first, and as a performer second. As a human being, he is one solid citizen. He has gone through a lot. He's come out of it a much better human being as a result. He's kind. He's respectful. He's thoughtful. And he's a phenomenal talent. Phenomenal talent. Working with Sting, especially in, I didn't work. I worked with him when I first came to WCW because I was the third string announcer. So there were times when he was forced to work with me whether he wanted to or not. But as things evolved and I started working with him more closely on a different level, I really, really got to respect Sting. So much that he and his former wife, ex-wife at the time, or ex-wife now, and and my wife and I would go out to Wyoming, and he was actually looking at property down the road from where we lived. So, we got to be very close for a period of time there, and I really enjoyed working with him. But Sting was at the top of his game. Here's the thing about Sting too. He was never one of those guys that promoted himself or pushed himself or forced himself into anything. He worked really hard at it, and he had great charisma, but he wasn't a political guy. He didn't play the same kind of games that a lot of guys did back at that time. He just worked hard and performed, and I really, really respected him, and I respected him then, but even more so now because I have a different perspective on things now than I did then, for sure.
Well, Eric, thank you so much for coming on the show. We know your Twitter's at @ebischoff. Is there anything you want to plug before we get you out of here?
Oh, yeah, check me out on Facebook. That's the one I'm really trying to blow up here. So it's my Facebook page is Eric Bischoff, Controversy. So
very nice.
An apropos title.
That's where you can find Eric Bischoff and all things related to my wrestling thoughts.
All right. Well, Eric, thank you so much for coming on the show. We would love to have you back sometime.
Anytime, guys. You got my number.
What an incredible interview with Eric Bischoff, and we want to thank him again for coming on Your Opinion Doesn't Matter. Learned a lot, Brad, especially about politics. I mean,
oh, man.
Tell us how you really feel, Eric.
I know Eric Bischoff was laying the smacketh down when it comes to the realm of the political mumbo-jumbo that's been going on in the news recently. It's been kind of crazy. But Bischoff.
Yeah.
He's the man.
Controversy creates cash.
Man. Have you ever read the book? I've read the book twice.
It's outstanding.
Oh, man.
It's outstanding.
I love his stories about the AWA in his early days. And, we're going to have to talk to Eric Bischoff about that more here in the future. He said, you heard him. He said we have his number.
Yeah. Call
so
him
anytime.
Anytime.
So we're going to do it.
Yeah.
We're right?
Maybe we could make it a regular thing where he comes on and just talks about politics.
I wouldn't mind that.
I'm happy with that.
I'm down. A quarterly political report from Eric Bischoff.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm all in.
Sold.
Book it.
I'd love it. Well, thanks again to Eric Bischoff for joining us on YODM. Listen, hit us up on Twitter at YODM Podcast on Twitter. Let us know what you think of these last two big interviews. More to come on the best damn podcast in the known universe. We're back tomorrow with more. Your Opinion Doesn't Matter.